Picture this. Paris, July 1720. 15,000 people crushed together outside a stone building, the Banque Royale. Men scream, women faint, soldiers shove with rifle butts. In the surge, bodies go down and never get up again, trampled on cobblestones slick with sweat and blood. What are they fighting for? Not bread, not water. Paper. Banknotes that, just months before, could buy mansions and vineyards. Now they might be worthless. Inside, clerks cower as people pound on the doors, begging to turn paper into silver before it's too late. This stampede didn't start with a harvest failure or foreign invasion. It started with a murderer who gambled for a living. 26 years earlier, in London's Bloomsbury Square, a fashionable young Scotsman named John Law drew his sword over a woman. One thrust, and his rival, Beau Wilson, lay dying. Law was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. Thrown into Newgate Prison, he waited for the hangman. Instead, he bribed his guards and slipped out of England, a condemned killer on the run. He crossed the Channel with nothing but charm, a quick mind, and an obsession with numbers. The next time he resurfaced, he wasn't just a fugitive. He was promising to save bankrupt France with pieces of printed paper, to turn government debt into fortunes, to make servants into millionaires. And for a few glittering years, almost everyone believed him. Mississippi Company shares rocketed from 500 livres to 10,000 in less than a year. A crooked-backed man in a Paris alley grew rich renting out his hump as a writing desk to frenzied traders. Then the music stopped. People burned banknotes for heat. France's economy took decades to recover. And the man who started it all died poor in Venice, while the system he invented quietly became the way the modern world does money. So how did a convicted killer become the architect of history's first modern financial bubble? And why does his story feel uncomfortably familiar today? Imagine being a peasant in France in 1715. For decades, Louis XIV, the Sun King, fought glorious, ruinously expensive wars. The palaces glittered, but the treasury was empty. Taxes were crushing. Creditors doubted they'd ever be repaid. When Louis XIV finally died, he left a 7-year-old heir, Louis XV, and a mountain of debt no one knew how to manage. Into this mess walked John Law. By then, Law had spent years drifting around Europe as a professional gambler. He haunted gaming tables in Amsterdam and Paris, but while others chased luck, he studied. In Amsterdam, he watched Dutch merchants using paper promises instead of chests of coins. Ships were financed with bills of exchange. Wealth moved as ink on ledgers, not piles of metal. He ran probability tables in his head, not just for cards, but for entire economies. And he came to one explosive conclusion. Money wasn't really gold. Money was trust. Gold and silver were scarce and awkward, he argued. When people hoarded them, trade stalled. But paper backed by land or commerce could expand as needed. Print more, and the economy could grow. He published these ideas. England and Scotland both turned him away. Too radical, too foreign, too criminal. France was desperate enough to listen. The Duke of Orléans, regent for the child king, knew Law from Paris salons. He'd heard the theories. He'd seen the numbers. His country was broke. Conventional finance had failed. So he did something extraordinary. He gave the kingdom's finances to an exiled killer who believed prosperity could be manufactured with ink and paper. Now picture Paris, May 1716. On a quiet street, the doors of a new institution swing open, the Banque Générale. This is Law's creation, France's first central bank. People walk in carrying heavy bags of coin. They walk out holding slim sheets of paper called banknotes. Each note promises that it can be turned back into metal on demand. At first, it's just a clever convenience, but very quickly, merchants notice something strange. Law's notes are better than coins. They're easier to count, easier to move, and everyone suddenly wants them. The notes trade at a small premium over metal. People prefer paper to silver. Confidence is doing the heavy lifting. Trade picks up. Taxes are paid more easily. The economy, which had been choking on bad money, starts to breathe again. Law has proved his first point. Money's power comes from belief, not from what it's printed on. He isn't finished. In 1717, he launches the next piece, the Compagnie d'Occident, soon famous as the Mississippi Company. On paper, it's a colonial venture, tasked with developing France's vast Louisiana territory along the Mississippi River. Most Europeans know almost nothing about this land. To them, it's a dreamy blur of forests, rivers, and rumored riches. Furs, timber, maybe gold. Law promises that the company will tap all of it. Here's the real innovation. France's crushing government debt will be swapped for Mississippi Company shares. Instead of the crown owing you fixed interest, you now own a piece of future colonial profits. If Louisiana thrives, your shares soar. Meanwhile, the state quietly retires its old IOUs. Debt becomes equity. On the streets of Paris, that sounds like alchemy. In 1718, the magic gets stronger. The bank is nationalized, renamed Banque Générale. Its notes are now royal promises, backed by the full prestige of the crown. Law advises cautious printing. The regent sees growth and wants more. Instead of 60 million livres of notes, the presses roar. The total climbs into the hundreds of millions, then toward $1 billion. At the same time, Mississippi shares that were supposed to be limited multiply. Demand is rabid. New issues are approved again and again. By early 1720, law fuses everything together. The bank and the company merge. The Banque Royale prints money. That money buys Mississippi shares. Rising share prices make people feel richer. Feeling richer, they borrow more from the bank. It's a feedback loop of confidence, credit, and hope. And it's beating hard as a single narrow street. Walk down Rue Quincampoix in late 1719. The lane is barely wide enough for 2 carriages to pass, yet now it's jammed wall to wall. Around 30,000 strangers have flooded into Paris, all drawn to this cramped alley where Mississippi Company shares trade by the minute. Brokers shout prices from upper windows. Clerks shove through crowds with parchment orders. Shopkeepers abandon their trades to speculate. A cobbler who once sold shoes now earns more by renting his table to scribbling speculators. Houses on the street, once modest, suddenly rent for 12 or 16 times their usual price. Every doorway becomes an exchange, every staircase, a trading floor. And then there's the hunchback. He's anonymous, poor, and deformed. In the crush, speculators need a place to write. He offers his back as a desk, for a fee. All day, hands drum on his shoulders, quills scratch across ledgers bent over his crooked spine. He leaves each evening with pockets stuffed full of paper profits. He is the bubble made flesh, a man producing nothing new and rich by money spinning faster than anyone can track. Stories spread everywhere. A servant scrapes together enough to buy 100 shares at 5,000 livres. Weeks later, the price hits 10,000. On paper, he's now a millionaire, richer than some nobles. Priests gossip about prices after Mass. Women pawn their jewels to jump in. Anyone not invested feels poor. Law's own house is besieged. Aristocrats bribe his servants just to whisper their names in his ear. Fashionable women send letters, then themselves, then gifts, trying to edge closer to where rumors are made. Options, primes, add rocket fuel. For a small deposit, you can reserve the right to buy shares later at a fixed price. If the stock rises, your tiny outlay explodes into a fortune. If it falls, you lose only the deposit. Primes jump in value within days. The entire city hums with numbers, promises, and paper. Meanwhile, on the actual Mississippi, settlers battle mosquitoes, disease, and logistics. Native nations resist. Spanish rivals prowl nearby. The real profits are slow, uncertain, and nowhere near big enough to justify a 10,000 livre share price. On Rue Quincampoix, No one wants to hear about swamps and fevers. They want to hear the latest quote. By February 1720, that quote hovers around 10,000 livres, a 20-fold gain in less than a year. The math is already breaking. Behind the scenes, law and a few insiders stare at balance sheets that no longer add up. By summer 1720, around 2.5 billion livres of banknotes circulate in France. The Banque Royale holds maybe 300 million in real gold and silver. As long as people stay calm and keep believing, that mismatch can hide in the background. If they all run to the bank at once, the system dies instantly. At the same time, the Mississippi Company still hasn't earned profits to match its promises. Dividends are pledged, but not backed by actual trade. So law tries to bend reality with law. Decrees roll out. Gold and silver coins are restricted to small transactions. Citizens are forbidden to hold more than a limited amount of metal. Police search houses for hidden specie. Goldsmiths are told to stop working with precious metals. Jewelry and gems become suspect, then illegal. The message is blunt. Stop clinging to gold. Trust the paper. It has the opposite effect. Wealthy Parisians smuggle coins abroad. Merchants silently convert cash into jewels and foreign assets. Black markets spring up overnight, where metal trades at steep premiums. Next, law turns to brute force. In March 1720, he announces that Mississippi shares will be held at 9,000 livres. The Banque Royale will buy at that price no matter what. Between March and May, the presses spit out another 1.5 billion livres, more new money in 3 months than the entire system had seen in years. It's like pumping air into a balloon already stretched to its limit. On May 21st, the line snaps. The peg is abandoned. A new decree calmly explains that Mississippi shares will be stepped down from 9,000 to 5,000 livres, and that banknotes themselves will be devalued by half. In plain terms, everything you own in this system, shares and paper, is now worth 50% less. Overnight, the spell shatters. Confidence, which built the bubble, flips to fear in an instant. This is where we return to that crowd outside the Banque Royale. News of the devaluation races through Paris. People who were content to sit on their paper yesterday sprint to the bank today. They aren't thinking about dividends or colonial trade now. They're thinking about survival. They want silver coins they can touch. They want anything that can't be halved by decree. The line outside swells into a mob. Carriages arrive from the countryside stacked with banknotes. Servants are sent at dawn to hold places for their masters. The doors open. The first lucky few push in and emerge clutching metal. The rest see the chests are not bottomless. Panic ripples through the crowd. People shove, women fall, men climb over each other, children vanish beneath boots. In the crush, 15 people are crushed to death against stone and timber, purses still in their hands. Inside, clerks can't keep up. The reserves drop visibly. Officials slam shutters and announce new rules. Only small notes will be redeemed. Anything over 10 livres? Come back later. Later never comes. By September 1720, Mississippi shares have fallen to about 2,000 livres. By year's end, they hover near 1,000. Within a year, they drift down to 500, their starting price. The spectacular climb is erased. The Banque Royale closes its doors in November. The institution that once made paper more valuable than gold now can't meet basic promises. Law is fired as Comptroller General after just a few months. His properties are seized. Within days, he disguises himself and slips out of France, just as he once fled England. A fugitive again. But for most French people, the worst pain isn't the stock crash. It's what happens to the price of bread. With billions of livres chasing the same loaves, the cost of basic food explodes. Wages don't keep up. Each week, the banknotes in a laborer's pocket buy less. Out in the countryside, farmers do the grim calculus. If they sell grain for paper today, by the time they use that paper, it may be worth a fraction. So they hold back stock, waiting for higher prices or more reliable payment. Food convoys thin. Market stalls in Paris grow bare. People who never owned a single Mississippi share suddenly can't afford bread. Soap disappears. Washerwomen, hearing that merchants refuse paper, demand that those hoarding goods be forced to accept the collapsing currency. That's the cruelty of hyperinflation. A country can be drowning in money and still starving for goods. Soon a Banque Royale note is worth more as fuel than as money. People literally throw handfuls into stoves. The paper that once bought estates now just slightly warms a freezing room. Who survives best? Not the servants who became paper millionaires, then watched their fortunes vanish. Not laborers whose wages lag behind prices. The winners are the well-connected and the quick, those who switched into gold early, those who smuggled jewels abroad, those who understood long before the crowd that the math didn't work. One more group benefits: small debtors. If you owed a fixed amount before the bubble, you can now repay in money gutted by inflation. Your mortgage shrinks. Your lender eats the loss. For everyone else, the reckoning is brutal. France will not shrug this off in a couple of years. It will spend decades paying. After his escape, John Law wanders Europe with his reputation in ruins. He gambles again in Rome and Venice, but on a smaller, sadder scale. His patron, the Duke of Orleans, dies in 1723. Any hope of return to French power dies with him. He's quietly pardoned in England for that long-ago duel, returns briefly, then drifts back to Venice. Once the richest man in Europe, he now lives in borrowed rooms. In March 1729, John Law dies of pneumonia, poor and mostly forgotten by the crowd that once mobbed his carriage. Meanwhile, the French state absorbs the wreckage of his system. The debts of the bank and company don't vanish. They're folded into royal obligations. Taxes rise. Suspicion of paper money hardens into reflex. For roughly 60 years, any whisper of banking reform in France hits the same wall. Remember John Law. That trauma helps paralyze the monarchy's finances. By 1789, that paralysis is one of the forces pushing France toward revolution. Then, astonishingly, the revolutionary government repeats the pattern. It prints a new paper currency, the assignat, backed by confiscated church lands. At first, prosperity, then overprinting, inflation, chaos. Same curve, new slogan. And yet, beneath the wreckage, Law's core insight quietly wins. Today, every major currency on earth is fiat, backed not by gold, but by confidence. Every advanced economy has a central bank managing money supply and credit. Law's Banque Générale was the prototype. We live inside John Law's idea. He was right that money is a social agreement, not a shiny metal. He was right that expanding credit carefully can unlock growth. He was right that a state doesn't need vaults full of gold to be rich. His failure wasn't the concept of paper money. It was the belief that humans, handed a printing press and a chance at easy gain, would show restraint. They didn't in 1720. They didn't in the South Sea bubble in London that same year, when a different company promised to turn British debt into oceanic riches. They didn't in the dot-com mania of 2000, when websites with no profits traded at billions. They didn't in the housing frenzy of 2008, when mortgages were sliced and resold until no one knew what anything was worth. And they haven't in our era of crypto empires and vapor tokens, where fortunes appear on screens overnight, backed mostly by belief. The pattern is the same. A powerful new financial tool, a dazzling story of future wealth. Prices detaching from reality. Insiders quietly moving to safety, then panic, collapse, and the familiar ending. Those closest to the money walk away, bruised but rich. Ordinary people hold the losses. The Mississippi bubble isn't just a strange French episode from 3 centuries ago. It's a template. It shows that the real engine of any boom isn't technology or trade. It's trust, created, magnified, abused, and finally shattered. John Law spent his life trying to harness that force. For a moment he did. Then it turned on him, and on an entire country. The system he imagined surrounds us now, from central banks to stock markets to the credit limits on our phones. The question his story leaves hanging is simple and uncomfortable. The next time we find ourselves on our own Rue Quincampoix, crowded, excited, convinced that this time is different, will we recognize the sound of a bubble inflating? Or will we only hear it when it pops?